Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I think you stayed away from the rain, so that's a good idea. I would just like to thank Documentary Campus, who made this panel possible, and I will hand you to our chair and esteemed speaker. So, and John, I'll let you introduce yourself then. And there.
I've got a mic, thank you.
Oh, you got a mic?
Yeah.
Yes, you have a mic.
Hi, everyone. Welcome for this discussion about one of those subjects which is sort of a bit of a story, a bit of a subject of the moment, which is the sort of rise of factually based drama and the fantastic opportunities it presents or allegedly presents. Yes, I'm John Smith, and I am now creative director of a newish indie called Arrow Media. And before that, I used to run a company called Darlow Smithson, and where we did quite a lot in this sort of area, which is, as someone who's primarily a documentary producer, it's still my first love, moving the form around and particularly telling true stories in a scripted way. As I said, there's been something like huge changes in the market. We've seen in America with the big factual channels like History and Nat Geo and now Discovery, doing major, fully scripted pieces, just like the networks used to do, and getting monster audiences, like History doing Hatfield and McCoys, or the Bible, or the Vikings, Nat Geo doing Killing Lincoln. And in the UK, where we've been doing it, it's not a new thing, it has been going on for some time. Yet it seems to me there's an awful lot around. There's a lot more in the specialist factual domain. Channel 4 right now are doing some stuff, sort of history, and so there's a lot of it around, and a lot of broadcasters looking at it and thinking it's a way of telling true stories that audiences seem to like, despite all the challenges and the costs. So I guess many of you here, because you're at Sheffield, you're more experienced, or you're predominantly from that factual world, especially the doc world, but are interested in making the journey into scripted. And so what I want to do is really just focus on that journey, with both the opportunities and the perils and pitfalls that are involved in that journey. All four of us here are on that journey in our different ways. So I thought it would be good to get our sort of dispatches from the front line, as it were, of what's happening on that journey, what we are learning, why we're doing it, and so on. And also really keen, don't really want to be one of those panels where everyone just has 10 minutes and goes on about something, and someone else has 10 minutes. I'd much rather just mix it up. We want to just kick it around as much as possible, and very keen to hear anything from those of you on the journey or wanting to make the journey, or whatever. Let me briefly introduce, to be democratic, in alphabetical order, my fellow travelers on the journey. Martin Davidson, who's got allergy, which is why he gets the medical segregation of the sofa. Don't come too near. God, I feel the fever. Martin is the commissioning editor for history and business at the BBC, and he's been a producer and a director and a writer. And are you a photographer as well? I've seen you taking lots of pictures.
Only an amateur.
Okay, and he's been in independent production and now the BBC, and he's done a lot of it. He's had considerable experience already in commissioning scripted factual pieces. What are you doing any right now? You can talk about?
I've viewed one that's just finished, which comes out in August, which is written by Ian Hislop and Nick Newman, which is a big World War I piece about an extraordinary true story of the people who set up a Tommy's newspaper called the Wipers Times. Wipers being what the Tommies called Ypres. And it's the story of this amazing man who set up this paper. So that's we've got another three-part of World War I in production. I've got a big BBC One American co-pro, a big set at sea, big adventure.
Oh, what's that?
Drama.
Can you tell us?
Yeah, of course not. Oh. And which it's based on a Nathaniel Philbrick story, the story of the Essex, the whaling ship. It's the source for Moby Dick, and it's kind of Life of Pi but no tiger. And lots of other things, well, a handful of things in development.
Good. At the end there is Bart Layton, who's a filmmaker and is creative director of Raw, who are one of the hottest indies around right now, with that lovely thing, a big, juicy hit series or two in America. Nothing like that to help you try and do the other things you want to do, which is what he's done so admirably. I really respect those guys, actually, because despite the big output, the fantastic growth, there's a genuine commitment to creativity and quality that's dead up my street, so I do respect him for that. And there's no better example of that than a film Bart recently directed, a theatrical doc that many of you may know of, or I hope have seen, called The Imposter, which I thought was scandalously not the winner of the BAFTA this year. It should have won. I voted for it, and it should have won the Oscar as well, but I think the reenactment probably did for it in the Oscars, but a great film. And has The Imposter given you the scripted bug?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always that thing where you start getting into something which is a fully fictionalized story, and then a documentary story will appear, and inevitably, you know, there's something about a true story which I guess tells you more about human beings, and it is always going to be more extraordinary than something that, even it may on paper be a better story, but if it's come out of someone's imagination, it doesn't have that thing that blows you away in the way that a story like, you know, The Imposter or 127 Hours or one of these things, I think it gives you that extra. So every time I feel like I'm getting into fully sort of scripted fiction, I come across a documentary which makes me think, you know, there's something about that which you kind of can't, you know, you can't make it up.
That's something I want to get into, because that's sort of one of the issues, isn't it? But we'll come back to that. Finally, Patricia Boutinard-Ruel, who runs a Paris-based indie called, do I pronounce it Nalaya? You did.
I love the way you pronounce my name.
I know. It's so embarrassing. Patricia Boutinard-Ruel.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. I only got GCSE in French, unfortunately. And previously, what's your company called now? Nalaya.
Nilaya.
Oh,
It's
okay.
Sanskrit.
Thank you.
Right.
Previously, she was the queen of factual television in France, with a uber distinguished career running docs and specialist factual across all the channels in what is the French equivalent of the BBC. And we worked together sometimes then on scripted stuff and on doc. And things are interesting in France. You know, who would ever thought that Channel 4 would be taking, which they did on Sunday night, a French scripted series, The Return. So tectonic plates are moving just a little bit, and lots of opportunities in what Patricia does, and you know, and she's on this same journey. I mean, is scripted part of your agenda now with your new company?
Yeah, sure. Well, in fact, it started a long time ago, probably inspired by BBC, because when I was on France television, I was co-producing a lot with BBC. The way around, it was more difficult. And so we co-produced, you know, Walking with Dinosaurs and all these kind of series. And then when we arrived to Man, the beginning of Man, I said, no, it's enough. Now we're going to produce our own scripted documentaries. And we did the first one, and it was such a big success that, you know, we wanted to innovate more and more. And then it really is now a trend in France, really. So when I quit France Television and I created my own company, I wanted to do this kind of, you know, hybrid film too.
Okay, so just one sort of thing of sort of clarification, because the sort of language is dead woolly around sort of factual drama and whatever, and I think that's that could be seen as being a confusing title. I think what we're talking about today is when factual plays by the rules of drama. When there's script, when there's actors, when there's dialogue, when you've got the same aspirations, although they're not always the same budget, as a fictional piece, and all the nightmares that come from that as well. So we're not talking about hybrid, we're not talking about drama docs, we're not talking about reenactments when you have anything from a few £100 to a few £100,000 to do the reenactment, which you may or may not have with actors or people who say they're actors and often aren't, all the usual joys of trying to do reenactment, which we all, one way or another, have been involved with. That's not what we're talking about. although it's a very interesting stepping stone to making that full leap into drama. So what's the point? What is the point of doing drama when you can tell brilliant stories by documentary or by the hybrid? Patricia?
Well, I think there are two reasons. The reason. The first one is maybe frustration, because when you are producing documentaries, there is facts, and it's difficult to go further. It's difficult to go in the brain of the characters. It's, this human dimension is not really completely there. So, and there is a lack of image, of course, when you're doing history or even contemporary topics. Sometimes you need image. When you have the image, when you can shoot the image, it's different. You have brilliant documentaries. Remember this film about this trial in America by a French man who had the Oscar.
Death on a Staircase.
Staircase.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant,
that was brilliant. And I think you can't do more with a fiction. It was so thrilling, so engaging. So it's a question of frustration. When you don't have the images, you have to find a creative solution.
That's sort of the wrong reason to do it, though, is it? Because if it's the only way to tell the story, isn't it?
It's a wrong...
Isn't that the wrong... I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe sometimes it is the only option, but it somehow feels like a negative reason rather than a positive reason.
Yeah, it could be a negative, but it can be also a very creative one. And there is also another reason, which is freedom. I think you can have much more freedom with directing a drama inspired by factual. When, for example, people are still alive, it's difficult to make a documentary when people are well known with only interviews and just evocation. So you can go further. So I think it's probably the two main reasons for that.
What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I suppose I'm less concerned with all the labels of, the labeling and stuff. I suppose where I've had issue with, drama documentary, or whatever, in that you've got this kind of combination of interview and you've got recreation or sort of, scripted sequences. And I think if you've got the people who are there to tell you the story, that's really where the story has to come from, I think. And I think if you use that cleverly and wisely, you don't need narration. That's where the emotional heart of the story is, and it's quite, and now of course we're running out of people who can tell stories from the world wars and things like that. And so I think there's a difference between that and I think I've taken issue with where you've got these people telling you these stories, and then we go into these sequences which are sort of drama heavy and they're dialogue driven, and there's a kind of conflict as to what's supposed to be, where the plot's supposed to come from, because you see these sequences and you think, so am I supposed to think that conversation actually happened? Is that, and if so, why is no one telling me about it, or why are they not describing? So I feel like I suppose I want it to be kind of one thing or the other, and I think when you go into a place where you haven't got primary testimony, where you haven't got someone who is there to give you the emotional story, then I sort of feel like it has to go into, drama world. And I'm not sure how enhanced that is by having experts, historians and stuff popping up. I think you're then between a kind of rock and a hard place slightly. You've got something which feels like people, you've got these sequences where they're using the kind of conditional tense and saying, well, that's what would have happened. He would have built that, would have taken that amount of time to build that pyramid. And so I feel like at that point, let's do what, some of these I think really brilliant kind of factually based series do, but ultimately they're drama. That's fiction we're into now, and I think anytime you've got a writer, and even with the best job in the world, that they're going to adhere as much as possible to all and do masses of research and sit in the British Library for months on end. At a certain point, it has to have a kind of beginning, middle, and end, and that is going to require crafting, and at that point there has to be a kind of willingness to not worry so much about the labeling and kind of think, now we are moving into it's drama. It's based on a true story, but it's drama. So I guess, I don't know.
Well, I look at it very much from one thing that a really well rendered, historically based drama can offer you is three things. Behind closed doors, it can get you, which is a riveting place to be, if it's the right doors closed for the wrong reason. It can give you the present tense, and even more interesting than the present tense shared by people who don't yet know what the outcome of their actions are going to be. And those are the three things that documentary struggles to deliver. So those three things are, when you have the prospect of having them, they are very, very seductive, and then as you say, borrowing the clothes from drama, the drama toolkit becomes rather a compelling one. We'll go on to talk about all the misuses of the drama toolkit in the world of documentary, and they are legion. But staying on a more positive note, those three qualities, I think, are mesmerizing. It's what you get from fiction. The reason I like factually based drama, why I always use that phrase, I'm not a drama producer, I don't have the talent to be one, but I'm also not one by inclination, is that phrase you had at the beginning, you can't make it up. Braveheart, the movie, is more interesting, for all the twaddle it is guilty of, it is more interesting than Xena Warrior Princess. Because deep down somewhere, something like that happened, and it's intriguing. The great Ur text for all of this, I think, when we cast our minds back in the last 10 years, the greatest of all is one, actually, I'm doing a session on Saturday morning about, and I brought the DVD for the moderator, which is Peter Watkins' film Culloden from 1964, which is just the peerless masterpiece in this whole genre. But bringing it more up to date, usually the one I refer to is the Wannsee conference that HBO did called Conspiracy, with Stanley Tucci playing Heydrich, and he played Eichmann, and Kenneth Branagh played. And the genius of that, if genius is the right word about something so malevolent, was it happened in real time. This meeting did take 90 minutes, and it was a pivotal moment of unspeakable horror, and you might say told you more about the Holocaust than endless attempts to do boys in striped pajamas. And I thought that was compelling. And the great thing they got right, which was explained to me, which is, of course, that if you're going to make these pieces, and we can talk about budget, but we have very limited budgets, you may as well choose a piece that happened, and if it did happen in a finite place over a finite time, you're onto something. The great thing about a meeting, a trial, all of those things is people are play acting already. They're already a mise-en-scène. So you get to play roles within roles, which is why we endlessly get attracted to the 3 days that changed the world one way or another. Those are the sort of honeypots we go to. But those are the three notes I think I look to strike. Present tense from people who don't yet know the outcome of their own actions, and behind closed doors. And drama, or the tools of drama, are brilliant at delivering those.
Maybe there is another thing we didn't talk about, is the actor, the role of the actor. I think in a drama, for example, let's say, maybe you've seen Carlos, the series on Canal+. It was a 6-hour series about this terrorist. I think we could have done, of course, a fantastic series about Carlos. But as you know, a terrorist, a story about terrorists doesn't attract a lot of people. I mean, it's very difficult to make a big rating. So that's also one reason to make some drama, to make dramas, It's to be more attractive. This Carlos, he was fantastic. I mean, the comedian was attractive, sexy, he was such a killer, but you just fell in love with him immediately when you see him. So you were really interested by the story during the 6 episodes, and you could understand something maybe you wouldn't have with just a documentary.
But that's one of the problems of factual drama, that often
Emotion.
you get a budget, but you get a budget less than the big glossy drama department stuff. Yeah. So you can't have the name actor that can transform a piece. Instead, you get somebody
the only exception to that
would do well to be playing here on a Tuesday night.
Actually, the only exception to that was the key to all those BBC 4 biopic dramas, factually based, which is you can offer a good actor a hell of a role, And then so Michael Sheen being, and they are unashamedly star vehicles, and actually that's attractive. What you're not is just part of an ensemble. We can't afford 20 great actors to do a 20th of a thing each.
But I also think
Carlos, Carlos the Jackal, that guy, yeah.
Yeah.
It was, and so he was like a well-known French comedian, was he, that played?
It was not so long.
French,
It was not so well known.
it's the translation.
Spanish, yeah. It was
But
not so well known in
interestingly,
France.
I mean, one of the interesting things about Carlos, if you guys haven't seen it, is that there are sections where, so wherever there's a kind of opportunity to tie in archive, so he goes and we see, his terrorist attempt or whatever, the bombing is dramatized, and then we cut to the archive of it. And I think there's something really interesting to think about in the use of that, because I think there are certainly with, The Imposter, I felt like, and a lot of people asked me afterwards, why didn't you make a fully scripted feature film out of that? It plays like a feature, it plays like a thriller, it's a kind of extraordinary story. And of course, once you go into, even if it says based on a true story, we all saw Argo, and of course it was based on a true story with masses of kind of Hollywoodization as well, but you lose something kind of extraordinary, which is what Martin's saying, is it really happened. And I think, for me, I'm kind of interested in looking at how we continue to incorporate those reminders about this, which I think Carlos does well.
Yeah, you're right.
For me, with The Imposter, if we'd lost the fact that those real people who went through that experience are there to tell the story, you kind of lose the most extraordinary thing about it, I suppose.
And isn't that, for people thinking about this journey we talked about, those skills you develop because you've all got this documentary background of telling true stories, isn't that one of those things that helps make a difference if you're trying to make the leap into that world of fully scripted, where you're dealing with people who don't need to worry about veracity because they just make up the story?
Well, the worst place you can end up is and I quite often get invited, because now drama's got in on all of this, and I quite often get invited to come and talk to drama producers. The most recent one I did, that Paula Milner is writing a Cold War era drama based on a book, and I invited...
A true story?
No, it's a novel, but it has to be true. So I invited Dominic Sandbrook, who we're doing a three-parter, a traditional documentary on Cold War Britain. So he and I went and briefed the team on what the Cold War was, the kind of mindset and stuff. Now, Paula Milne got it. She'd read, she absolutely knew it, but I was a bit worried. Around the table, there was a sense in which Suez Crisis, Sputnik, it's all the same. And that happens when with a factually based drama, which doesn't have that absolute obsession with the real story, is it becomes a fact Bible has been written, and it's been turned into speech bubbles. And you get what we call, or I always call, the "What News from the North, my lord?" with people in top hats telling each other things they already know. The best example of which was Ray Winston as Henry VIII in an ITV version of the story, being told by Cardinal Wolsey how many years he'd been married to Catherine of Aragon. And that's where it becomes absurd, when you just turn a fact Bible into speech bubbles. You need to metabolize it. Something needs to happen. But in my experience, the drama people I'm talking to are getting wind of that actually an audience can spot something that's phony. Sometimes it doesn't matter.
But the trickiness is that the job of a writer is kind of often at odds with the job of the guy, I guess, the documentary maker, or the person who, particularly if at the BBC, the person whose job it is to really keep an eye on the facts. And whereas the job of a writer, all they're really concerned with is telling the most compelling story with a kind of staggering third act and twist and all the rest of it. And, I certainly remember working on The Imposter, and a lot of the people, the exec producers involved with it, were from feature film background. They weren't experienced in docs at all. And the kinds of notes that we would get were like, kind of, you need to make the ending, we need to make that more twisted, and, we actually, wouldn't it be better if we could just tie up a lot of those loose ends? And it's like, well, hang on a minute, there is this small matter of it ultimately being a documentary, and we can't take the lovely Hollywood ending and apply it to that. And so there is a tension between what a dramatist is trying to do and what we are concerned about, which is, you know, really delivering something which you can stand by the people who wrote the book or the contributors who gave you the interview and say, we tried to tell your story.
That's
accurately.
one of the biggest problems we all face, I think. Suddenly, this person with this job description that doesn't truly exist in documentary called the writer, and it's some person you spent months trying to get, and you're spending shed loads of money for them to write the script, and then they don't want the straitjacket, the factual straitjacket you're trying to impose and say that's wonderful, but it wasn't true. And you know, a lot of writers run a mile from that. They say, you're just giving me nothing to write. And that
depends what I mean, I don't imagine Michael Hirst was too troubled by factual accuracy when he was writing Spartacus. I mean, that's just a launch pad to bollocks.
Spartacus wasn't going to sue, was he?
No, and who cared? So that's fine. You don't have to be too po-faced about it, but certainly the area I really do, you know, I do have a kind of grading of things that make me interested, and if there is a source, if there really are transcripts, so it's an amazing way people can find them. One thing we're looking to do is something based on all the transcripts. What's the word? The shorthand delineation of all the things spoken by the gunpowder conspirators. James I was obsessed. Now, why did these men try and kill me? So he had them interrogated. They were religious fanatics, so they were very happy to explain. So we've got pages and pages of stuff you could not make up in language you couldn't make up. And I'm also co-producing something with Rick Burns with PBS, who is also doing a 17th century subject. And what appeals to us is the absolute solid rock of is it sourced? And when you have that, I think you squander it at your peril. But that's a very particular thing. It's not theatrical released, of course not. You know, and there is a spectrum. And
are we being too stuffy about this? Because, I mean, it's a nightmare. If you're doing a script, you've got to do, if it's contemporary, you've got to go through with line-by-line notation, trying to justifying having evidence for virtually every line of dialogue. And it's painstaking and it's mind-numbing. But should we be protective of that, or should we make the best? You know, a drama director thinks it's pathetic.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are we all too hung up and creatures of our documentary past?
I mean, you know, American TV, we do a huge amount of our output is in the States, and the thing that concerns me more is not that watching the kind of factual drama stuff remains adheres to the facts. It's that it's actually that the factual or the stuff that is presented as close to what you get on Discovery or whatever as documentary, and I'm not biting the hand that feeds me, but there is a perception amongst the audience that they're not really bothered whether this is scripted or semi-scripted or so all of those reality shows which are about people doing extraordinary things in Alaska or whatever it is, the pressure is to deliver story. And at the expense of kind of factual accuracy, which is something we haven't got to here, I don't think. But it's a trickier thing, because when you've got the stuff that's supposed to be factual moving into scripted, and over here it because it's like The Only Way is Essex or whatever it is, or Made in Chelsea.
But nothing compared to what happens on a daily basis in America.
Yeah, but they don't care.
No.
There'll be a backlash at some point, because no one will know what the fuck's true and what's not.
About all these people doing, better be careful what I say here, but the people now embracing the scripted material are being much more loose about than we would be in the BBC environment, and I bet in the French environment as well.
Yeah. But I think it's different. If you propose to the public a docudrama, the public will really, look for something really documented, really, based on factual, very precisely. Otherwise, he's troubled. I mean, he's, And we made some kind of quality studies, about what their perception was. And on docudrama, sometimes when we were going too far, they didn't like it. While if it's a pure drama, I mean, fiction drama, historical drama, they accept it. They accept the convention. Then you can go further. You know, you can go further in the psychological depth of the characters.
I mean, I think, I mean, I agree with that. I think there is a contract with the viewer. The viewer can tell it's that spectrum. Yeah. And I think you look and you know there's everything from Atlantis-type nonsense at one end to something that does purport to go. If my contention is right that this is present tense, behind closed doors, and it's real, then the quality of eavesdropping is diluted if you think you've just made it up. So there is a commitment there. But I think I'm not so hung up as you are about whether there's documentary elements in it. I don't mind, or it's separate. I mean, two examples I have, because I think docudrama can also provide explanation. It can also anatomize. And the example we did a piece 3 years ago about Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety, because it was brought to my attention that the number of days separating Robespierre's elevation to the Committee of Public Safety and his guillotining was 365. It was a literal calendar year. And from that, there's still a lot of records of the proceedings. And I just loved the idea of just the phrase, the Committee of Public Safety. That's modern terror. And actually, what we tried to explore was the French Revolution justified, or did it set up an idea that was finally consummated with Pol Pot, the Ayatollah, revolutions and inhumanity justified by the purity of an idea gone mad? And what we did with that piece was that we dramatized the proceedings of to understand how those ideals got perverted, with a broad selection of historians who argued there was a fantastic exchange of the most polarized opinion you could have about whether the French Revolution was worth it, between Simon Schama and the Slovakian philosopher Zizek, who was a warmed-up Stalinist who thinks that all revolution is it's omelettes made with broken eggs, all the way to Schama, whose view is nothing justifies the bloodshed, and that the American Revolution spilled no blood. And I think at the end of that piece, what the drama did was that the drama and the documentary mutually illuminated, and it was a fantastic piece which spoke to an idea.
But which you could still, it was 300 years ago, there was no transcript of what was said in the room. For a dramaturg, well, you'd still have a massive amount of dramatic license.
Yes,
I would argue.
Yes.
Whereas anything you're doing in the last 50 years, it's a much more, let's say you're trying to do Stephen Lawrence.
Yes.
You simply, when we did Anne Frank, which we did with Franz, a story that was totally well known, read by millions of people, you couldn't develop some stupid love interest for Anne Frank that wasn't in the book, because no one would...
But why would you want to?
Well, stranger things happen all the time, but... endless true stories are mucked up by Hollywood every day, aren't they? But that's a separate issue. But
I mean, you mentioned Hatfields and McCoys, which is a game changer in the landscape of certainly in American TV. This is a History Channel produced a 3-part series starring Kevin Costner, which did. I mean, their highest ratings I think they'd ever had on that network was something
14
like 4
million.
It was 4 million.
No, 14.
The highest ratings prior to that,
exactly.
And it did 40 million, which is beyond what this is beyond what the non-cable networks are doing. So, in terms of its factual accuracy, that was it was loosely based on a couple of warring families. Near Kentucky, but of course it was so well executed. It was a movie, and I think it now means that many of these networks are looking at, I suppose, factual drama in the loosest terms. That they're less concerned about the factual, they're more concerned about the drama, because it's the drama which is suddenly doing a ratings number for them that their traditional sort of, I suppose, factual programming is not, and that presents huge opportunities for us as producers. Certainly, we've done a lot in the drama doc space, and now we're starting to do, fully scripted stuff. But it also means that there is this kind of slight, uneasiness. I sort of feel over, how far you can push.
Yeah, it's difficult.
But you raised an interesting point there. Do you think this growth unquestioned growth in factual drama is an opportunity for factual producers, because the guy who's scooping up all the work in America is the well-known documentary producer Ridley Scott. I mean, he is doing 3 now for Nat Geo.
But of course, he's not actually doing anything. He's lending his name because if you're a cable outfit and you're going to put a big drama on about, the assassination of Lincoln, and you put from producer Ridley Scott, you've given it credibility. But actually, it's his company hiring directors who've worked for us to do it,
Yeah, on the Bible, everyone that had worked for Darla Smithson did the huge Mark Burnett reenactment of the Bible. All spent 6 months in Morocco.
Yeah, that's
I spoke to
the
the guy
story
yesterday,
of
he said, "I got
fill in
Jesus."
blank. Yeah.
I think we have more legitimacy, in a sense, coming from documentary to work on these kind of topics, because we know how to work with historians, with scientists, with, so after it's a question of, looking for the great talents to go further. But
do you ever pick up on that attitude? We've heard the word imposter a bit today, that we are imposters, that the people, these giants of drama, have this God-given talent that us oiks that just do our little £140,000 documentaries
I really
don't have.
thought that.
Do you feel that?
Well, I really felt like, in sort of dipping a toe into that world, that's, there's a sort of mystery to that, and a whole grammar that if you've grown up as a documentary maker, you're not party, but actually, documentary filmmakers are so good, because most of us come back with 60 hours of a kind of amorphous smear of kind of human activity, and then we've got to shape that into a 3-act structure, and we're pretty good screenwriters, even though we don't know it. And actually, I think having started to have more and more meetings with writers and authors and bringing factual stories to screenwriters, they're much less, I guess they're less equipped than I had imagined. I think we're pretty good at spinning story, because we deal with truth, and truth doesn't always play out like a Hollywood movie.
What do you think?
I think,
are we the gods, or are they the gods?
We're definitely the gods.
When I was a director, I did always lust after the day when the credit I most wanted to have just once in my life was Dolby and selected theatres at the end of a film I'd made, and it's never happened. It's never happened, and I've renounced it. I worked when I worked on early on. One of the first jobs I had was on The Late Show, and there were 11 directors there who all went on to make feature films, including Paul Greengrass, Mary Harron. I mean, really proper feature films. And apart from 1.5 of them, it all came to nothing. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that's a tough old world. I have no role to play in it within my little corner of the field. Nevertheless, to go back to what I said earlier, I think we can do interesting work for our audiences that borrows from different toolboxes. And I think the drama toolbox is a really, really good one. And occasionally, as you've proved, who thought 10 years ago that documentary could be theatrically released with all the excitement and authenticity and spellbinding, can't believe, lean forward tingle of the best possible films? And I think the cross currents go in all sorts of different directions. In terms of directors, is this an opportunity? Well, an awful lot of them have been factual directors. I think the real opportunity, to go back to the quality control thing I am absolutely obsessed by now, and we've paid a terrible price for ignoring it, is the scripts. It's the people who write it. And I think I've done my best to kill one dragon, which is the producer who thinks they can write a script. And we went through about 7 or 8 years of that, which was the perfect speech bubble thing. And a lot of people, certainly, not just in the BBC, but across the indie world, all fancied themselves screenwriters because they'd all done bloody English at Oxbridge. They all thought, oh, I can do this, and you can't. I think directors are more able to move between different forms.
I mean, you said, I was going to pick you up on it. You said you thought making the jump to screenwriting was less of a problem than Martin is saying. And
you're particularly gifted, and that's unusual.
I side with Martin.
No. I
suppose
suppose I use screenwriting, when I mention screenwriting, I suppose I mean that as a shorthand for structuring a story in a way, because what we're doing when we shape an observational documentary into a story which has a beginning, middle, and end. You know, that is kind of partly the job of, you know, the screenwriter in a way. And I suppose, I mean, I think there are lots of doc makers who are really kind of, you know, who are probably more qualified to do that than they might imagine.
I agree with that. I mean, many documentary directors are very good at storytelling. I mean, this is their job, really.
Some are.
The core of it. But it's true that in France, it's very rare that you can see a documentary director going to drama. It's quite rare.
We have, there's certainly there's a population of them who I work with, I'd say 20 in number roughly, who are amphibians. They do both, and are very successful. Also, they appeal to me because they're also used to working within, well, first of all, working with the bears with little brains who work in factual television as opposed to drama, but also they're good at working with that budget.
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing for a documentary director is to deal with actors, which is, you know, very difficult, as you know. And, you know, there are not so many to do that.
But that, I mean, there's no book you can read that says how to deal with actors. There's no...
There is, actually.
Is there?
Yeah.
Okay,
no, there's a lot. But it's a terrifying thing, you know.
It's all a load of bollocks, though, isn't it? I mean, it's just...
I don't know. I mean, you know, I think if you know, what makes you good with a contributor in a documentary setting of getting the best out of an interview or getting the best out of an observational sequence, you know, it's not that dissimilar. You still look at it and you see what you need to happen that isn't happening. And I think certainly in my approach with actors is it's not dissimilar from that. I can only go on my instinct of what I'm looking at and what doesn't seem to be working. And I think, so I guess my feeling is that the mystery is not, it's not so difficult.
I think it's a skill you either have or you don't, and whether you're a documentary director or you spent 6 years directing here in theatre, it's still a skill you have or you don't. At the end of the day, it's working with people and understanding egos and all of those things. And if you know, but it's amazing, that I agree, is it separates those that are going to make it and those that make the plunge and then end up going back to docs.
But there's another level to this, another sort of wrinkle, which I'm also really interested in, without it becoming too philosophical. There is levels of truth. And sometimes, so why do I think Game of Thrones is the most important, is the best documentary series ever made about medieval war, like Wars of the Roses? Because because what I look at, never mind the dragons and all the made-up bollocks. What's amazing about it is there's 2 or 3 emotional truths that ring very deeply true to me about life in the Middle Ages, which the Borgias never comes close to getting. How cheap life is. The experiences of those children who just watch all their families getting slaughtered and grow up in a particular way. What is honour? What is ruthlessness? How is power legitimated? All in the context of it all might be for naught anyway because we're about to be consumed. That brilliant line, winter is coming. It may all be nothing. We may be swamped by a disaster, even beyond your imaginations as you squabble your dynastic squabbles. And I just think that is why I think another touchstone in this, particularly in America, this search for follow-up. Because let's not kid ourselves, what's driving it was the 8 seconds that elapsed when the overnights for Hatfield and McCoys came out, when every network, and we all know who they are, because they all rang us up 10 seconds later with, I want one now. And I remember having one conversation with one of the, pretty obvious who it was, and we instantly nominated, like everybody did, fucking Braveheart. Why did we do that again? And I said, does it matter of interest? Does it actually matter to you that it's set in the century it's set, that it's a fight for freedom and it's got to do with Scotland, England? No. I said, it's Middle Earth. That's all it is. It's swords. It's Game of Thrones. That's what you want. Now, and the answer came, yeah. In other words, don't get hung up on facts. The last thing we want our audience to think of is a history piece. Now, I understand that, but I think they've gone about it exactly the wrong way around, which is why when I watch Vikings, I think it's awful. It doesn't work for me, and I love that stuff.
That's the History Channel Vikings.
It's just dead, because what it is it's affected, and it's got its idea completely wrong about where historical truth lies. And it strikes the wrong note. It's merely ruthless. It's just a bunch of tropes. Whereas the genius of Game of Thrones is that actually the truth it gets right is an interesting one. It's a Shakespearean one. You know, Shakespeare's full of anachronisms, but there is something that. And the other point you notice when that goes wrong is, so when I went in one of these festivals, conferences in just before Christmas, and we had a session with the people who did Hatfield, and they showed that very famous scene. There's a very long scene where Kevin Costner, it's a bit like at the end of Godfather 2 when Fredo gets shot. Finally, Michael Corleone, his last circle of hell, as he finally shoots his brother. So it's that kind of thing. Kevin Costner is slowly cocking a gun while his nephew or his cousin is slowly monologuing about how he never managed to find in himself enough hatred to join in the feud, and you know he's going to be shot. And all the way through it, you're going, he's got highlights in his hair, he's got perfect teeth, and he's wearing a paisley shirt. He looks like straight out of a boy band. So any idea that this was tough, harrowing, uncompromisingly brilliant history was rubbish. And you just thought, well, it's very effective. And either that worries you or it doesn't. I mean, it did me. It just broke the spell completely.
Sort of interesting, by the way. None of these total hit shows in the US have done anything ratings-wise when they've shown in the UK. It's funny. Hatfield and McCoys did nothing. I don't think Vikings... Has Vikings been on? I don't know. But
why is that funny, John? Because, you know, I think one of these sessions, David Glover talked about getting higher ratings with his little film on a storm in Birmingham than on the tsunami. I mean, the Hatfields and McCoys is such a quintessential American.
Well, also, the trouble is, it's derivative. We've seen it. All it was Deadwood. It was The Unforgiven, outlawed Josie Wells. You've seen it all. And for something that was presented as being such a radical break with the past, we all looked and thought, it so isn't. It's just like every other one of those Civil War era, good men turned into monsters despite themselves. And felt familiar.
But interestingly, you know, if you talk to the Americans about, you know, part of the reasons for its successes, they'll tell you it was pre-sold, which is something that, you know, I guess we don't tend to have our commissioner meetings in those terms, but pre-sold means it is part of American iconography, you know, that story of those two families, and that's what it brings. And
real
so,
McCoy.
Which is why, exactly, and which is why when you start, you know, which is why it's going to be Killing Lincoln, it's going to be Vikings, it's probably going to be barbarians, it's going to be the things which you didn't really listen at school in the history lesson, but this will do it for you in a nutshell. The Bible, all of that. That's kind of the world in which they operate. And I don't think we don't come to things in that way. Our need for those, our iconography or our history is longer, bigger. You know, it's just a sort of slightly different thing.
that's, I mean, why, even though we talk about this fantastic opportunity, I think we need to pour a big bucket of cold water on it as well, because particularly, I mean, some of those US commissions are great commissions to have, and they're what, $20, $30 million or something, the big ones, the good ones. But the chances of a newcomer company, a relatively young company, realistically doesn't stand a cat in hell's chance of doing it. And if you come up with a great idea that they like, most certainly they'll want you to partner with another company, which means, you know, effectively you lose control. They'll just take your idea.
Yeah, although I would say I think Americans tend to look at production companies differently than Brits do. You know, I don't think, you know, if you make a hit series in the States and it's a factual series, yet the next thing out the door you're pitching is a drama, all they're interested in is that you can deliver a hit. And I don't think they actually tend to, they don't interrogate, but who in
well,
there
in that
has
sense,
done...
they're less snobby, perhaps, than the UK environment, where it's more about what you've done, whereas there, as you say, nothing succeeds like a hit.
But what about you, John? I mean, you're chairing, but you've probably got as much or more experience. I mean, you know, 127 Hours, for example, could have been a feature doc in the same
It was going to be.
vein as Touching the Void. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about the process by which that ended up being a fully scripted feature film, and whether you wanted it to be that, or what, you know.
Well, what I just think it's about the idea, and what's the way of maximising what you do with that idea. Imposter could have been, as you say, anything from a 1 hour cutting edge to a fully scripted, loosely based on the truth, with Sandra Bullock and somebody playing the boy. Mm-hmm. It could have been anything. every story has its own level.
Balance.
If you get an extraordinary story, which I think 127 Hours was, you keep pushing at it. I mean, that was 6 years to get it, and it was going nowhere, and then Danny Boyle said he wanted to do it, and he'd just done Slumdog and won an Oscar and was the hottest director in the world, so that slightly transformed overnight the chances of it happening. But it's about finding, the power of the idea. I think it's hard enough in documentaries. Once you go in scripted, that idea is so important, and if you can get something exclusively, or you can get access, and you can do it, those I think are almost the easiest. You're doing a fascinating project we were talking about right now as maybe your next film, which is just a great story idea. I'm doing 2 or 3 right now with the new company, where I'm trying to push them all the way beyond television into theatrical, either as documentary, or you're thinking, is the best way to go pure doc, pure doc like Sugar Man was a pure doc. Imposter did have reenactment. Touching the Void had reenactment. Or do you go all the way fully scripted like 127 Hours? I don't know. Everything's
I think you always have
a
to,
level. And
you always have to start with the story.
Go higher. What's the best way of telling the story?
It's interesting. I mean, you said The Imposter could have been a cutting edge, and actually it couldn't have, because the thing that you can. It's worth talking about the cinema for a bit, because the stuff that you can do in the cinema, the only real criteria is it has to be. I'm not even sure this is the criteria, but it kind of has to be a great story. Whereas on TV, it has to be a great story, but it also has to tap into something current. There has to be a way that you're going to get an audience to see it. The Imposter, no one was interested in that as a TV thing, because how do you draw an audience to it? And 127 Hours to make that, it would have had to been part of a series, one of these big kind of I Shouldn't Be Alive type things.
You tried on television with television?
Well, yeah, I started having conversations. I always wanted it to be. It was always going to be a cinema film. I wanted the Dolby thing, and but I that it felt like it was worthy. How many stories do you read, which and everyone's used that cliche, stranger than fiction, but there are only a handful which are. If it was a work of fiction, you just wouldn't believe a word of it.
But then what happens with drama is that becomes a virtue. So the fact you haven't heard of it becomes a virtue, which is a documentary is a problem. Because documentary, particularly on mainstream channels, requires some level of recognition to draw an audience that will justify the amount of money it costs to make.
That's a good point.
And I mean, the example I had was, I was researching, I found out some years ago a German grandfather of mine had been in the SS. So I wrote a book about what he'd done and who he was. And part of that story, I uncovered a story that even Germans don't know, some do, which we then turned into a drama, because I became obsessed with it. I did not know that in May 1931, Hitler got put on trial, and a Jewish 28-year-old lawyer ran circles around him for 4 hours before the High Court judge brought it to a conclusion. And the third act of the story was he refused to leave Berlin, even though his card was clearly marked, and the day after the Reichstag fire, after Hitler came to power, he was straight off to Sachsenhausen, then to Dachau, where he was beaten up every single day until he committed suicide in 1938. It was a very famous story in the late 30s in Britain, because his mother came to Britain to plead using her son's example. But I just thought, I had no idea that a 28-year-old lawyer, and the reason he did it was 3 Nazis had shot up some communists in a dance hall, which is in North Berlin, and he was a famous lawyer who worked on behalf of people beaten up by Nazis. And he subpoenaed Hitler and put him in the dock to show the German people that all this rhetoric about respectability was rubbish, and that in his phrase, Hitler is riding 2 horses, one of violence and one of respectability. The terrible thing at the end of it was the German people looked at this court and said, and there was a terrible moment in his life when he realized that nobody cared. People cared more about order than they did about law. And it was an extraordinary moment to tell you about that journey, tipping point, just before it was all too late. And I found that story, and there's the name of a street in Berlin where the court is named after him, but most Germans I spoke to had never heard of him. And I was alerted to it because I have a cousin who was a lawyer, and we did it as a drama. And that got...
You also did it as a documentary.
Yes, we did both. We did parallel, because I wanted to make sure nobody thought we were making it up. And the actual drama was too good, in my view, to be interrupted. Sometimes it works. So we did a drama, we did a documentary with relatives and with human rights lawyers who now look at, because it's the name of a famous German law prize. You get this prize if you're a humanitarian lawyer. And I just thought that I would never, okay, I was in the fortunate position, every now and again, being a commissioner, you can sort of do a passion project of your own. I know it's corrupt, but it was something I felt, I was allowed one. And we did, and the documentary is amazing. I mean, it's amazing, but it would never, what would that have looked like in the listings? Whereas a drama, you kind of go Nazi-era courtroom drama, and it did rate twice as much. So the other great tool, never forget, and I think it's true of your piece, and 127 Hours, which is the joy of it is you've never heard of it. But if you get very quickly a touchstone, a sense of what the world is that you're being pitched, what is the present tense? What is my predicament going to be?
I'll tell you what I just want to think about as well. So, there's 3 people here run independent production companies, and you used to be involved in a big one. We're talking about all this opportunity. Of course, it's exciting. Of course, you can do fantastic things. But is it simply nutty to think you can just do it? I mean, how realistic? There's 1,500 production companies or whatever in the UK. To enter this game, you've got to spend real money. No one's going to give you development money straight away. You might have to shell out quite a lot just to develop something or to option something. How realistic is the opportunity, and how scary a business is it? I just wonder I know what I think, but is it the opportunity's there, but is it a risk worth taking?
Well, if you're talking about UK, I think it's very difficult. Even when I was, in the position of a commissioning editor, it was really a pain in the ass to have a co-production. So, I gave up with for the moment. But I think it will change because we all will be obliged to co-produce, because of the crisis, because of the budget cut. So we have to keep on trying to be commissioned by UK. I think it's easier maybe in other countries, European countries.
Co-producing means you've got something that, how do you even get the project that people even want to discuss co-producing? They're not going to co-produce based on a half-page idea that you want to do a film about, the steel industry in Sheffield.
No, but the international component is interesting. So I think one of the wedges there is what we're now doing increasingly, as we did with Lusitania, and you made it, is you make sure that if there is a German or a French component, you get really good German and French actors. Once upon a time, you wouldn't. It would have been hello accents. But
it's just getting on the board, though. That I'm saying, just to get to the start of the Snakes and Ladders is expensive, and you've got all the stuff going through RAW and you're doing a lot of things now. It's a big decision.
Most of the scripted stuff that we're doing is not factual. It's just purely. Often it's a documentary or a factual story, which is the inspiration for it. But in answer to your question, I don't think it's as difficult as I had imagined. I think in TV drama, it's the writer is king, and unfortunately in the UK, there are like 10 writers whose names come up over and over again, and they are so oversubscribed and they are so busy. If they love your project and you are able to attach them, then you may not have produced anything, and suddenly great forces will come to your aid. I think that's really. I think that's one of the things we found. But, of course, to get to a stage where you're investing in someone sitting, developing this stuff...
just to get to the stage that you will attract the A-list writer, that's a lot of time and a fair amount of money.
But it can just be, like you say, a great story.
Yeah. I don't deny that.
In France, I would start by having a development agreement, first. And then I would go to the other countries with that. And for example, I'm producing a big film about the origins of man, First Man, and it's an enormous budget at the end for production, but it's also an enormous budget for developing the film, So we first need to be really engaged in France, and then we go to the other countries.
Anyone else want to join in on this? Anyone? Any thoughts? Anyone embarking or involved in this journey with anything to throw in?
Can I ask a question? It's not to do with that, sorry, John, it's to do with other stuff I was talking about. Because with The Imposter, I'm just really interested in this sort of blending of drama and factual that you did so brilliantly in The Imposter, and if you think about some of the other big theatrical docs like Man on Wire or, lovely last year, Sugar Man, Touching the Void, it seems to me that you had this gift of a central character and you asked him to act. And in a way, Man on Wire did that too, less so Sugar Man. But you turned those central characters in a way into really good actors. And I'm wondering whether, Bart, you made the decision to get him to reenact those.
He doesn't. He's not acting in any of it.
He's not the person.
No.
Well, that's how well they're done. Because I'm sorry, I don't know if anybody else has seen The Imposter and made the same mistake.
Yeah.
No,
Did
no,
anybody else think
you're
he
not.
was doing
You're
the
definitely
acting?
not the first person to ask that. But I think first of all, I would have felt uncomfortable with the idea of him acting. I think there would have been a level of kind of complicity within the production which would have changed him, even though he's not an interviewee in the traditional sense, in that, you're invited to, my intention was to put you on the receiving end of the con man in the way that I was, and I was quite taken by him and realised that, I was buying into a story which had been written and rewritten and honed over a long period of time. And I wanted you to kind of almost be beguiled by him in the way that everyone he came into contact was. But the drama elements of The Imposter were, reconstruction, I suppose, is one way of thinking about it, but it wasn't supposed to be a reconstruction of what must have happened. The drama elements were supposed to be completely unlike reality. They were supposed to be, an extension of the story you're being told. The best way I can describe it is if you listen to a radio play, or if I were to tell you a great story that began on a dark and stormy night, quite quickly this sort of movie starts playing in your head, and that was what I was trying to visualize and be very clear that the dramatized elements were kind of extensions of the story, not what must have happened, but the story he wants you to hear happened, and full of heightened reality and kind of a film noir sensibility.
Does it matter that people thought that he was playing that part at all? Does that matter? Does
No.
that change things?
For me, it's really interesting because, particularly when you go to places like, in Spain, for example, we opened at the San Sebastian Film Festival, and they do not have a culture of drama documentary. Man on Wire was not something they were familiar with. Even Touching the Void, it's a film. I don't think they even had many documentaries, and in the Q&A, people refused to believe no amount of me telling them it was a documentary would make them believe. They thought all of the interviewees were actors, and I got blue in the face, and then they were telling me, "You're the imposter," I was like, okay.
John, can I just wanted to pick up on something, or Martin actually. Martin, you said earlier about the biopics on BBC Four, because I think what was interesting about those and what makes this what makes, if that's the right word, factual-based drama more interesting than the pure scripted drama based on historical events, is that actually documentary producers end up having to be more creative, or people who've been in the documentary field have to be more creative. And one of the ways is doing it through single characters or just picking a certain period of their life. But I just wondered do you think there are other things that documentary makers could be doing to push the genre even further, or those sorts of filmmakers, I suppose? Because I just think we may have the tools more than your average scripted writer who's used to big budgets and lots of actors, of making kind of really interesting films.
I think we've only just scratched the surface. I think there's the only thing I'd suggest, however, is, in a funny sort of way, it's almost too easy to come up with moments from pivotal moments that would make a good drama. And there's a bit of a curve. You go very steeply up, whoa, hundreds of them, and then the reality check kicks in. You think, well, really, okay, the 3 days when Eisenhower did this, the 3 days when this happened, the moment when Churchill did this, you do have to shake the sieve. But I know, you know, if I was a director, writer, producer again, one day will be, that's exactly where I'd be. I'd have such a string to your bow. And, you know, you look at your success and you think, I want to do that. That's what I want. I mean, how much more interesting is the output in the last 24 months because of those kind of pieces? And we all watch Bird and Wire and Touching the Void. And all that happens is your vocabulary expands.
But I think it's about also, and we've got those skills to do it, it's about blurring boundaries. It's great, like, on Imposter, you know, the Spanish audience, Margie, whatever, you know, you didn't know what...
Silly.
You know, I think that's really good. And I think, you know, those days when we all did the reenactment and in the film, that was the archive bit, that was the interview, that was the CGI, and there's the reenactment again. And it was clunky, and it was like painting by numbers, and I think that's just over. And it's about, the brilliantly successful films are about merging the elements so you don't even notice them. I didn't spend a second watching The Imposter thinking, I just enjoyed it as a story and I was taken on a journey. And I think that's the holy grail for those of us doing this. And I think that's the way forward. And we have, back to Martin's toolkit, we have those tools because with every day you're looking about how to put something on screen. What are the elements? How do you tell a story when the people aren't alive, or there's no archive, or you can't get access? We face that every day in trying to tell true stories, and just apply that, and then that's magic if you can crack that. And audiences are changing, and you know, it may be even we just got to get over a little bit. I hate to say it, and it's against everything I've always stood for, but we may be getting too hung up on veracity, and it's about, you know, drama directors talk about essential truth, which is a code word for not the real truth.
But I mean,
it's equally a fair comment as well.
It's interesting, you know, because I, like John and Martin, you know, have spent a lot of time exec producing, and with drama documentary, one of the things that I'm kind of like, you know, most, I suppose, you know, feel most accustomed to saying is when people come back with their drama documentaries, you say, let's take all of the dialogue out of the drama. Because if you've got people who are really there, like I said at the beginning, you've got to think about why we're dramatizing things, because if you think that actually it's more exciting to see that moment when they kissed than hearing the person describing the moment they kissed, actually, you're probably not necessarily right about that. Looking someone in the eye who really lived through that and just letting them tell you that story is 9 times out of 10 it's more powerful than watching someone who you know is an actor recreating a scene of someone who's telling you this, you know. So I think it's just about kind of being sort of judicious and avoiding the temptation to dramatize everything kind of.
Yeah, I mean, Martin was talking about the power of being taken into a moment, which drama can do, but Factual can do that so much better. Look at Senna and the power of that film. You know, the power of those driver briefings of being taken to a world you don't normally see. That transformed it. Now, no drama. I noticed, I just saw on the email there's an invite for this new Formula One film that Peter Morgan's written. I'm really interested to see how that plays compared to, say, Senna. You know, and that's, you know, in some ways maybe in this rush to drama, we're forgetting what we do.
I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to tell a story, an experience. 3 years ago, we made a film about a heart transplant, scientific film, in France too. And we wanted to mix interviews and drama, because we wanted to have a story of a donor and a receiver, I mean the family of the receiver, and you can't have that in a documentary because of ethic reasons. So we had both, and at the beginning when we launched and when I commissioned the film, the documentary part was 30-minute part and the fiction had to be 60 minutes. But at the end, you know, the interviews was so fantastic that the proportion was
totally the other way around.
It was very funny. There is no rule, you know.
No, there isn't. I mean, I remember I made a film. I mean, 20 years ago now, about Muhammad Ali. And I thought the way I was going to start it was I talked to everyone. I said, tell me, what was his greatest fight? Not George Foreman. What was the greatest fight? And it turned out to be a November 1966 fight against a guy called Cleveland Williams that nobody had ever heard of. And we got the archive. It's never bothered because it's not one of his famous Rumble in the Jungle fights. And for 90 seconds, he danced, doing all that Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay stuff, and we cut it to one particular track called Don't Sit Down by the Johnny Upchurch Combo, which absolutely, I've never done it in an edit. I pressed 2 plays, Walkman and the Avid, and it cut itself. And we got everyone who'd ever fought or knew anything about Ali to tell them what was so great about that fight. And I remember one guy said, it was like he was in a jitterbug contest. He never danced like that ever again. And you were in the moment. And at the end of it, it lasted 90 seconds. We didn't cut it. And at the end of it, you thought, if that's the only thing you ever know about Muhammad Ali, that's all you need to know. Yeah. And it was astonishing. I watched it again the other day. I was doing a talk about history documentary, and the narcissist in me thought, I wonder what that looks like 20 years later. And I got it out. So that's all it is. It's 3 bits of sync and this archive, and I defy you not to watch the next 10 minutes, because you are in the ring watching this god move like you've never seen an athlete move. And it's the same thing you get with Senna, that the way he bites his lip, that petulant, actually I thought a rather unsympathetic man, but charismatic. And yeah, but there is how much more interesting that was. That's archive, of course. And you can have documentary, you can have written archive as well as moving archive. But that is about authenticity. And I think however you get there, authenticity is a pretty good thing to have. Yeah. And there are different ways of getting it. And if you don't have it, it doesn't matter what
And
tool
I think,
you
the pursuit of authenticity, whether it's drama or documentary, is kind of, and probably more so in drama. And then you'll get closer to something. In drama, you spend as much time and money as you can creating something that feels authentic.
Well, certainly from the commissioning angle, and from all the directors and producers I work with, there is no question the environment we work in our little corner of Factual is 3 or 4 times more exciting than it was, because you have all of these. They're all choices. Yeah. And the only thing that worries me about the American bandwagon, they all want it, is they'll all come lumbering down the track in 18 months, and 90% of them will be turkeys, and it'll die. And you feel all that effort and money and sort of shock and awe, and at the end of it, there'll just be a cloud of dust. Whereas I think what we still have here is an ecology where, right project for right mode, right medium for the right project, and none of you should exclude any of them. And just across the spectrum of all the work we're talking about, there will be an answer.
There's a guy up there. Is that a question for a while?
I just have a quick comment with regards to writers not writers knowing so much about reality or something, or not proving out to be so useful. Maybe you guys should talk to your editors a bit about the scripted factual, because at the end of the day, they're the ones in documentary who sit there and figure out the structure and talk a lot about the storytelling aspect in that way. I'm an editor, so...
Oh, I guess.
A picture editor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think, as I tried to describe earlier, I'm now finding myself more and more in a room with drama teams talking about moments of history. I'm not a historian, but just in the sense of feeling our way into a subject matter. And usually what I'll do is I'll bring somebody who is. And I've noticed we've had far more of those than, once upon a time, no threshold run by anyone in drama was going to be darkened by the lights of me. And now that does change. And it is just, look, here's somebody who's got something to say about, you want to know what really was going on with Heath's government in 74 with the second Dayton missile crisis, he'll tell you. And I find the good writers I work with sponge that up. And I think it's an exciting part of the process. You're having different conversations with different people.
Okay, I think we've sort of run out of time. Thank you. And all I can say is, if you really want to do the journey, then if you really, really want to do it, chances are it might work out. And isn't it incredibly lucky that we got this new opportunity available to us, and there is no limit to the ambition you can have, and I think that's fantastically exciting. So thank you very much.
That's really true.
Thank you.